Hello and welcome everyone to the Paint Tacoma Beautiful Prep and Paint 101 training. Thanks for being here. This training is a requirement for crew leads and site leads, but it's optional for all other volunteers who want to learn just a little bit more about painting techniques before they dive into their projects. We did have some technical difficulties while recording this training, so there may be times when other folks are talking and you'll notice my wonderful face is frozen. So if you want to, if that's a distraction to you, you can always just take the window out of full screen and put it up behind some other window you might have going on your computer. And without further ado, we'll dive right in. I'll introduce myself. Most of you know me already. We've been in touch most likely. I'm the Program Outreach Coordinator at Associated Ministries. I do most of the volunteer recruitment and onboarding for Paint Tacoma Beautiful. So it's at this point in the season that I'm kind of slowly handing folks off to Amy and Brian, who are going to be involved more in the volunteer management side of things and the technical parts of Paint Tacoma. But I'm always available if any of you have general questions about volunteering or feedback and all that good stuff. So I'll still be in touch with you throughout the season. And Amy, I'll introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm Amy Allison. I'm Director of Community Mobilization here at Associated Ministries. So I oversee several programs that engage volunteers in service. And so Paint Tacoma is just one of those programs. And this is my 8th summer, I think, working with the Paint Tacoma program.
Nice. And then Brian couldn't be here today. I don't know, Amy, do you want to add anything about how Brian's going to be working with volunteers?
So the paint specialist means he is the expert on our staff. So any questions you have about the jobs themselves, supplies, anything about your actual project work is primarily Brian's purview. And I'm available as a backup if Brian is unavailable. But his cell phone number is included there so that you can reach him whenever. He'll always have that on him. So
yeah, perfect. All right, so today I'm going to go over a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into the actual information we're here today for. And then Amy will be talking a little bit about the supplies with Paint Tacoma Beautiful, and then we'll dive into prepping and painting 101. So just as a general reminder, I think most of you on this call have completed our volunteer application, but it's probably the number one thing I have to remind people to do, so I thought I'd insert it in here. But just as a general friendly reminder, if you are watching this as a pre-recorded training at home and you know you haven't done this yet, just maybe hit pause, follow the link, and complete that. It's pretty quick and easy. All we ask is for your name and date of birth, and you can just complete those required fields, and that's all we need. So this won't apply to any of you who are on this live training right now, but for folks who are watching the pre-recorded version of this, it's helpful to let me know that you have completed this training, especially if you're a crew lead or a site lead. That way I know that you are, you've completed the training that you need to generally know how to do some exterior painting. All right, and I'll let Amy take it away on supplies.
Hi, okay. So I just want to let you know the supplies that we provide for you all. The first is we have equipment to reserve and check out, and that includes ladders, pressure washers, and caulk guns, and yard tools if needed. So what reserve and check out means is that if you want to let us know how many ladders and you're going to need, we have a limited number, so usually we're only able to provide about 3 to a crew if other crews are also using them. There are some times when your crew may be the only one trying to reserve them and you may be able to have more than the typical 3. Pressure washers, again, when you need to reserve it and when you want to return it. So you basically typically reach out to Brian either by email or phone to ask to reserve. When you check them out, you will we will record that you have checked, reserved it. When you come to pick it up, you will sign that you're checking it out, and when you return, you sign to say that you've returned it. Okay? If you need additional equipment, please let PTB staff know. In general, we cannot reimburse for purchases or rentals. We can make exceptions on occasion, like there have been occasions where somebody has needed a ladder that's taller than what we have available, and they needed to rent it. But you just have to have our prior approval in order for us to be able to say, yes, you can have it and we'll reimburse for that cost. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay.
Awesome.
Next slide. We also provide whatever supplies you need to do the project. So we provide you with the prep tools, and we'll be talking about that a little later. Masking tape, plastic sheeting, duct tape, painter's tape, and caulk. And the paint supplies, which includes paint, primer, brushes, rollers, and roller trays. We also provide you with protection supplies, including face masks, shoe covers, sanitizing sprays, and paper towels. And then we provide PTB t-shirts, which are yours to keep. The face mask, in the past, we have provided a handful of N95 masks for the folks working on the prep stages of the house. Now N95 masks are not available because of the need for them in the hospitals. So we were able to have somebody who sewed a bunch of cloth face masks. We're going to be providing cloth face masks to everyone on your crew. And then, of course, the PTB t-shirts. So you'll let us know in advance how many face masks and how many t-shirts you need and what sizes.
Great. Yeah, and just in general, we encourage you to bring anything else that you may need for your own comfort and safety. So water and snacks, sunscreen, bug spray, work gloves, goggles, first aid kit. We do recommend you bring that. And then if you want extra paper towels, hand sanitizer, soap, trash bags, those are helpful for cleanup for yourself and for the site. And as Amy said, with COVID-19, we are going to be providing those masks, hand sanitizer, and paper towels to all crew members to keep the site nice and clean. All right, so that brings us to really how to prep. We're going to dive into each of these steps, but essentially the prep work always takes the longest. The painting part is actually the most fun and doesn't take quite as much time, but prep work area really includes scraping and sanding, pressure washing, caulking, removing obstacles, masking, and priming. All right, so we're going to be using quite a few videos in this presentation. It's more effective to teach this information through showing versus telling. So since we don't have the content rights to much of the videos we'll be using, I have added corresponding links to all of these videos in the video description here on YouTube for this presentation. So if you exit out of your full screen mode and scroll down to the video description, you might have to click a read more button. That should expand the video description and show you links that correspond with each video. So right now for video 1, work area prep, you're gonna exit out, follow the link in the video description, and it should just show you a brief portion of the video, not the whole thing. That is intentional, and we will be kind of coming back and forth between this video a few times, so we'll jump around in it and look at different parts, but for now we're just going to focus on the work area prep. So if any of you have issues with any of the links here, please reach out to me and let me know. I'm happy to share you an updated link if you need. All right, so that's generally the gist of kind of what the work area prep looks like. It's primarily just making sure that that there is drop cloth taped to the side of the house, and it's catching all of that debris that is going to come off when you're scraping and sanding and pressure washing. And we want to make sure that we're doing this first and foremost because we don't want to contaminate the yard or the lawn with paint chips. And also, we talk about this in our safety training a little bit more in regards to lead paint, but most of the homeowners who apply to the Paint Tacoma program have pretty old houses, and we need to assume that at least one layer of paint on there is probably contains lead, and so we want to make sure that we're capturing all of that and not contaminating any of the yard. Or even if it's a different house with that potentially may not have lead paint, it's still helpful to not have that in the soil and the lawn or anything like that. Amy, do you have anything to add on this topic?
No, that's the main thing is just, and we do provide heavy duty plastic sheeting. It's usually 3 mil. We sometimes have some 4 mil that we're able to provide to you. So it's a pretty solid piece of sheeting and can capture a lot. But it is almost inevitable that some chips are going to go somewhere else, and so we just ask that, you know, to the extent that you can, that you pick up those chips that have fallen elsewhere on the ground.
Yeah. And then I'll just pause too. I don't know if we have any questions so far that have come up.
One of the questions was about materials not safe to leave on site, like ladders. Usually the homeowner has a shed or a garage where you can store ladders. So if the project's not complete and either you or maybe another crew's coming back on another day, you can usually store the ladders there. If they don't have some place to store them safely, let us know. And if you're able to return them to our office, it's great. A lot of our ladders fold up. Some of our ladders are too big to put in a car, but most of our ladders fold up small enough that you can put them in a car trunk. So if you can't return them, let us know and we'll go by and pick them up.
Great. All right, so I'll share a little bit too about, so after the work, you can really do this either before or after you set up those drop cloths. This might actually be a better step to do before you prep the work area, but it is important at some point in the early part of the process to remove obstacles. That might be downspouts, address numbers, anything on the house that you're going to need to paint behind at some point. And what we want to do is save all of the hardware, put them in Ziploc bags, and then label them and tape them to the actual obstacles themselves. So if I'm taking a downspout off, you know, the northeast side of the house, I want to make sure that I'm saving all that hardware in a Ziploc bag and labeling that, you know, downspout, northeast side, and then taping it to the downspout, and then storing it in a garage or shed if there is such on the work site. You know, it's pretty obvious why we want to do this, but just to reiterate, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, a lot of volunteers helping out at Paint Tacoma, and things get moved around. So it's just really important that we are keeping track of making sure we're putting everything back exactly where we found it.
And I would add about certain things. If you have concerns that you're not going to be able to put them back up the way they came down, then I would leave them up. So things like downspouts. The other thing is there may be some things that are attached to the homeowner's wall, like they may have a reel for their hose or something like that the homeowner may not want you to bring down. And so we'll get a little later into masking some of those objects so that you don't paint on them as opposed to actually removing them. There may be some cases where it's better to leave it up and work around it, and there's ways to do that.
Perfect. All right, so Amy, I'll let you talk a little bit about the tools involved with scraping and sanding.
Yes, so you have some pictures here of the main tools that you'll be using for the scraping and sanding stage of prep, and we do provide these for you. The first in the top left corner is a 5-in-1 tool, and it's called 5-in-1 because it can do 5 different things. The flat edge is the equivalent of a scraper or putty knife. The little pointed corner of the flat edge can be used to open paint cans. Oh,
sorry.
There is the little rounded circle there, the little half moon, that can be used to clean off your rollers, to clean excess paint off the roller. The handle can be used as a hammer, and the little hole in the hammer can be used to remove nails. So those are the 5 different things that 5-in-1 tool can do. Top right corner is your putty knife, which can be used for scraping. We're going to watch a little video about this, but I wanted to just tell you what the tools were before we see it. Bottom left corner is your scraper. That is a very heavy duty tool, so it's really good for scraping things that are hard to remove, but it's also easy to do a little bit of damage, so you got to be real careful with that one. On the bottom right is the a wire brush, which is good for removing cedar shake, moving paint that's peeling off cedar shake. And cedar shake is sort of that ridged wood. And so something that's flat like a scraper or a putty knife isn't going to work very well on that. So the wire brush is what's useful for that. And on the bottom is a sanding block. So it's basically like sandpaper, but in a block. So it's easy to hold with your hands and use it to actually smooth this rough surfaces. We don't use any mechanical tools here at Paint Tacoma. And so we're not going to use mechanical sanders because that's the kind of thing that can spread a lot of dust. And we use the sanding blocks instead.
Great. So let's move on to the next video on scraping and sanding. Again, you'll just find that link in the video description. And whenever you're done watching that, just meet me back here.
Okay, so just a couple of tips there. You want to scrape with the grain. Okay, and she kind of showed you that, like if the grain is horizontal, you're going to scrape in a horizontal manner. If it's vertical, you're going to scrape in a vertical manner. With those cedar shingles that she showed you at the top, that's where the wire brush can come in handy, especially if they're the ones with the ridges. If it's not flaking or chipping, don't touch it. So we don't remove all of the old paint. We only remove the old paint that's chipped or flaked. So if the old paint is still smooth, we're not taking it off the house. You're going to sand down to smooth the areas that you've scraped. Again, she was using a mechanical sander. We don't use that. We use the sanding blocks. But basically, any place where you've scraped, you want to make sure that it's a nice, smooth finish. And so you will just use it with the hand brush. You want to start at the top and work your way down. One other thing I want to just say is that, again, you want to try to keep your sander, whatever tool you're using. Let me see if I can hold my hand in front of my camera. Okay, as close as sort of as flush to the wood as possible. You don't want to go at it this way because that's when you're more likely to damage the wood. Okay, so try to keep it as flush to the wood as possible or to whatever the surface is. One other thing we do is we always mist the surfaces before we scrape or sand. So we're going to give you a spray bottle where you can put water in it and just mist those surfaces. And you want to lightly mist it. You're not trying to drench it. But what it does is it prevents a lot of dust from flying off the area that you're scraping or sanding.
Yep.
And in the safety video, there's a really cute little I think it's cute because they're Australian, so their accents are wonderful. That we have that goes into a little bit of preventing lead dust, but they show that whole thing of misting it or using a little bit of water to keep some of the dust from flying up during the scraping and sanding process.
Yeah. All right, we'll move on to our next video on pressure washing. This one is quite a bit longer than some of the other clips, so if you want to kind of jump through it, feel free to do so. But, you know, if you'd like to watch the whole thing, we always encourage that. We'll be debriefing some of the information here on the next slide, so we'll meet back here whenever you're done. All right, so that's what a pressure washer is essentially, and why we use it sometimes, and I'll let Amy kind of dive us into best practices for that.
So again, we have several pressure washers that we can that you can reserve and check out. It is to prep the area. You also want to make sure. So in general, you're going to want to scrape before you pressure wash if there's a lot of chipping or flaking paint, because if you pressure wash, it's going to take that chipping and flaking paint off, and it's going to end up flying everywhere because of the strength of the pressure washer. And so you're going to want to prep your area. So again, you put down sheeting. We recommend something that's that the water can go through. So the plastic sheeting, it's not going to go through that. So old bed sheets, we do have some in our offices. Old bed sheets or weed block are the kinds of things that you can put down on the ground. And what they'll do is they'll catch any paint chips that come off while letting the water pass through. You can sometimes pre-wash, especially when you have mold, and you can see in the picture here that that's mold, not just dirt. And we have a garden sprayer. You can fix it. You can fill it with a bleach to water ratio, 1 part bleach to 5 parts water, and you can spray on the mold let it sit for about 15 minutes, and then you can hose it off. And that is one way to remove that before you actually use the pressure washer. A couple things with the pressure washer, you want to make sure, be really careful that you don't let the hose touch the motor, because the motor gets really hot. And if the hose touches it, it can actually cause cracks in the hose. You also want to make sure that when you turn it on, you let the water run all the way through the hose, so it starts dripping through the hose, the end of the hose, before you turn on the motor. So you turn on the water first. Basically, you hook up the hose of the pressure washer, one end of it, to their faucet, the outdoor faucet at the homeowner's house. You also work from top to bottom. So you start pressure washing at the top of the house and you come down to the bottom. It usually takes about 1 week to dry. Sometimes in the summer, you may have, it's maybe 3 days before it's dry enough to start paint, if we have a lot of really hot days consecutively. If there's anything else about the pressure washer. So again, if you need a little tutorial before you use it, you can come to the office and we can show you how to use it before you actually use it to do the work itself. There are sometimes we do have some volunteers who like doing the pressure washing. So if you don't feel like somebody on your crew feels equipped to do it, we can try to see if we can get another volunteer to help out with that if they're available. I think there was one other thing I wanted to say about the pressure washers. So they are the newer pressure washer models. The old ones used to be really, really heavy. The newer ones are pretty lightweight, and they usually fold up, like the handle folds up so they can fit easily in a trunk of a car. And we just usually ask, you may want to put down some tarp or a plastic bag on the bottom of the trunk of your car, just in case it leaks a little bit of water so it doesn't spill into your car. But they are pretty, the newer ones are pretty lightweight and easy to transport. And, I know what I was going to say. Every now and then you get a part of the house that you can't reach with the pressure washer, or you want to try to avoid windows and doors. There may be some areas where you can't. So I know last summer we were working on a house, and the wall next on the porch that was next to a really big window and the door, really, there was no way to actually pressure wash it without sort of hitting the door. So if that's the case, especially because it was on a porch and it was easy to reach, we got a bucket of water and some sponges and sponged it down. So if that's what you need to do to clean it, sometimes that's what it'll take, especially for some of those areas that are harder to reach or more risky to actually try to pressure wash.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add too, we go over this in the leadership and project planning training that'll be tomorrow from 2 to 3 p.m. But some of you are one-day crews, some of you are adopting a whole house from start to finish. So, these steps may or may not apply to you if you are a one-day crew. You might just be coming in for paint day, or you might be working on some of the prep on these houses. But typically pressure washing only may need 1 or 3 people. So this isn't like a huge job that's going to happen when a bunch of people are on site. It's usually something that'll probably happen ahead of time if you are on a one-day crew. All right. Any questions so far we know of, Amy?
Yeah, there was a question, careful around windows and doors and frames for leakage. So it's not as much leakage. It's we do provide painter's tape to put around them, but it's more about the pressure breaking the windows. Yeah. So that's why you don't want to hit the windows, basically. Yeah. So you just avoid them, basically. And you are working top to bottom, so the water's typically dripping down and not into, say, windows or doors.
Yeah. All right, video 4, we're going to look at caulking. So again, follow the link in the description, and we'll meet back here after you're done watching that one. Essentially, for those of you that have never caulked before, there is a tube of caulk is basically going to go into a caulking gun. And it's pretty intuitive to figure out, how to insert the tube into the caulking gun. But once that's in there, then you cut like a little angle tip off of the fresh tube of caulk, and then you'll pretty much just use the trigger on the caulking gun to form a bead along the areas where the house needs to be caulked. And the reason why, and then you'll smooth it out with your finger as well. But essentially, caulking is for the purpose of kind of buttoning up the house where there may be cracks, where wood is kind of separating from other wood. It's important to note that you can caulk most seams along a house, like up in the eaves or around windows, primarily windows and doors. Underneath each wood siding, there is a gap typically, and those gaps are meant to be there. So we want to not caulk those. We want to only caulk really windows, doors, maybe up in the eaves a little bit as well. And so, go ahead.
If there's cracks if there are cracks in the wood itself, so not the natural gaps between the siding, but cracks that have formed in it, you can caulk those. So.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And then, so it's important to, if you are caulking a window, don't caulk it shut. Just make sure that the window is still going to be able to open. And there is a slight difference between caulking and window glaze. Window glazing is kind of where you can the wood touches the glass, and that's a slightly different material, but it's a very similar concept to caulking. But caulking is going to be primarily where wood is touching other wood. And really the process for it, again, you're just using the caulking gun. You're kind of making a nice bead down the seam where the two wood have separated. And then you're going to be taking your finger and just smoothing out that bead so that it kind of gets smoothed into the wood essentially. And it's helpful to have a rag with you and a little small cup of water or something just to keep your finger wet, and then wipe off your finger when you're done smoothing out that bead of caulk. So and
I'll add a couple.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to add a couple things. One is a lot of the caulking guns will have a little hole in the side with a tiny little razor clip, and that you can use to clip the tip of the caulk tube open. And when you're done, if you have not used up the tube and you're going to be returning it to us, one of the things we ask is if you take some painter's tape and cover it again, and that way the remaining caulk doesn't dry out.
Exactly. Yeah, and caulking is helpful for weatherizing the house. It keeps cold air out. It wastes less energy. It can kind of reduce the amount of bugs that can get in the house. So there's a lot of helpful reasons why we do that. Also makes it look nice. All right, so Amy, you want to share a little bit about masking and drop cloths?
So I mentioned before that there's going to be things on the house that you either can't remove or maybe your homeowner doesn't want you to remove, and you want to cover them up so that we don't end up accidentally painting over them. So we do provide you with brown masking paper. It's kind of like the paper, looks a little bit like the paper that's used on a paper bag, but a little bit more lightweight and a little bit more pliable, that you can use to cover up things that you don't want to get paint on. And we do provide the painter's tape, the blue painter's tape, which is easy to remove. We also provide you with duct tape, but the duct tape is more for more heavy duty things, like taping the heavy duty sheeting to the concrete foundation of the house. Usually you'll use the blue painter's tape for things like covering up, say, light fixtures, or different things on the house, little obstructions on the house. If you make sure you remove the bulb first, so that if they turn on the light, it doesn't.
You're cutting out there a little bit, Amy.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, if you do cover up a light, like a light fixture, make sure that there's no bulb in it, because if you turn on that light and there's brown paper over it, it could cause a fire. So again, with all of these things, it's good to communicate with the homeowner. Let them know we're going to be covering this up. We're going to be taking this down. Whatever you're going to do, you're going to want to make sure that you communicate it well so that they're okay with what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
I was going to add a little bit about drop cloths. I mentioned that things like old sheets and blankets can be used in place of the plastic sheeting when you're pressure washing. They can also be used to cover up bushes or foliage that's next to the house that you don't want to get paint on. They're better than putting plastic sheeting over them because the plastic sheeting, when the sun hits it and hits the plastic, it can kind of burn that foliage. So it's better to put, like, say, an old blanket and an old sheet over that if you want to protect it from the paint.
All right, video 5, we're going to look at priming. This technique is really similar to painting, so if you want to skip this video and just watch the painting one, not a problem. And we'll meet back here when you're done.
So there's different types of primer. We provide all the primer and paint. So latex, oil-based, metal primer, stain blocking primer. There are a lot of really good all-in-one primers that are available now that can do all of the above. And so especially like the oil-based primer can be really, really messy and hard to clean up. So the all-in-ones are pretty nice. There may be some times when you still need some metal primer. For instance, if they have metal railings on their deck and you're painting those railings, the metal primer helps prevent rust. John, I'd love to hear anything your experience with primers. And past few years, we've been using the all-in-ones. Do you feel like they're pretty good for whatever else?
Yes, because in the many years we've been doing it, we've always avoided cedar because we didn't want to use oil. And now that they've come up with these hybrid primers, you can use latex on everything as long as you use that hybrid primer. Mm-hmm. And it works really well, because if you've ever painted cedar, the oils just bleed right through normal primer and the paint looks terrible. But these hybrids truly lock that oil that comes out of the cedar.
So what we do is spot priming. We're not scraping all the old paint off the house. We're also not priming the entire house. We're scraping off areas where it's flaking or chipping. And then we turn around and we prime areas that have been left with bare wood, or where the edges left by chipped paint that's been scraped off, where you have new dried caulking, holes that you've had to fill with putty, bare rusted metal, unpainted concrete, and we do prime all wood window seals just to help that paint on the window seals go on more smoothly.
Awesome. All right, we're going to look at how to paint finally. So why don't you click on the link for painting in the description section of this video and hit pause, and then we'll meet back here whenever you've finished watching that one. We don't spray any of our houses. Paint spraying is one way to paint a house, but we don't do that at Paint Tacoma just because it uses a lot of paint, and we can also run into the risk of overspray, where it could get into neighbors' lawns or on neighbors' houses or on the roof or things like that. Sometimes it's a little bit more hassle. So we just use brushes and rollers, and that seems to work pretty well. Amy or John, do you want to kind of add anything to best practices for painting?
In this part, yes. Where she said she does a trim first, in 30 years, we've never done that.
Okay.
If you notice the way she painted, it's the type where she's being very meticulous and doing the trim first and then using the darker color to cut in all the lap siding, which, frankly, we don't have time to do that, and it's not even noticeable from the street. So we always paint the body first, and we paint the side of the trim that you can't see, as in where the siding hits the trim. We paint that body color, and then we use a small roller to do the trim. It's much faster and it looks cleaner, and if you don't have highly experienced people, you get a better job.
Nice.
A couple of things I would add is, one of the things you want to do is you want to have a nice thick coat, but you don't want to have a lot of paint on your brush or roller when you do that, because then you're going to get a lot of drips. And so what that means is you're going you're gonna, when you dip your brush or you dip your roller into the paint, you want to scrape off the excess. So we do have they're called paint screens, and they look like a little screen. They're a little metal screen that you can wipe off the excess before you start putting it on the house. And what you do is you put on and then you smooth off. So you go in one direction direction, and then you go the opposite direction to smooth it. And if you do that a couple times, then you get a nice thick coat without having added a lot of paint to your brush or roller to begin with that will drip. One other thing you want to do is you want to follow the natural, just like with scraping, you want to follow the direction of the wood. So if the wood is vertical, you're going to want to go vertical. If it's horizontal, you're going to go horizontal. And you also want to end at a nice natural break. One of the things that can happen is if you end earlier than a natural break in the wood and it's hot and sunny and it dries, sometimes you can see the line where you stopped. And so you don't want to do that. So you'll go, you know, if you're using a roller and you're going across, go all the way across till it stops at a natural break. And John, what was you had a little tip about wetting your brushes first.
Yes.
Make it easier to clean.
Yes. Brushes and rollers, stick them in a bucket of water before you start. You think about it. When the matting in the roller and the brushes, if it's already wet, it has water that's making it wet instead of paint. So when you're done, you can clean it because it has water in the bottom of it. And it makes an incredible difference on cleanup afterward if you simply wet it before you ever put it in the paint. Of course, you have to knock the excess water off, but it really helps.
It's a great tip. Yeah, and one thing I forgot to add too is with decks and railings, it's important to make sure that the homeowner has an exit. So, you know, just if it's paint day, make sure that there's at least like one side of the house where there is an exit for the homeowner to get in and out. You know, if they have a back door and a front door, just make sure you're not painting those sides of the house at the same time, or painting, you know, the deck or the railing portion of that part of the house. And I have in my notes here too that it's important, especially if it's a really hot day, avoid the sides of the house that are directly in the sun, because if it is a super hot day, it may cause some blistering. I haven't had personal experience with that, but I don't know, John, if you have.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a very simple rule. Follow the shade.
Exactly.
As you paint, follow the shade. It keeps people safer, and the paint won't dry as hot. And I've painted as hot as 90 degrees, and then it's really important to follow the shade.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And I think that rule about not making sure that the homeowner always has a way out is also true during the prep stages, making sure that you're not doing both the side with the front door and the side with the back door at the same time. So again, that they always have a way out. With decks and railings, be really careful not to paint yourself into a corner. So start at the fore corner and then work your way out. Otherwise, you can find yourself stuck on a porch, not able to get off. So.
And it may seem kind of obvious, but when you pressure wash, ask the homeowner to close all the windows first.
Yeah. Good reminder. All right. Well, we got one more slide here, and then we'll answer any questions and then wrap up in just a few minutes. So, Amy, you want to talk about cleanup?
Yeah. So one of the things you want to do really well is make sure you clean up the property when you're done. We do provide you guys with a couple of garbage bags, but that's one of the reasons why with supplies we said bring your own. You may end up needing more. You are going to want to pick up all supplies and any supplies that you've used, any waste materials from the project.
You're cutting out there.
It does allow us to throw away garbage in a homeowner, anything from a home improvement project is okay. Anything from a home improvement project is considered non-hazardous waste. So we are allowed to put it into a homeowner's trash barrel. If it is waste from the prep stages where there might be lead chips in it, and we go over this more in the safety training, but you should put it in a plastic bag and then do a goose tie and seal it with duct tape before you put it in the trash barrel so that it stays completely shut. If there's more trash than their trash barrel can handle, which sometimes happens, then leave the extra trash bags in a corner of the house and let us know, and we'll come and do a dump run for the homeowner. But in general, you can throw away the trash in their barrel because it is considered non-hazardous waste. When you're cleaning up supplies, One of the things we recommend is that you have filled buckets with water and that you swish tools and brushes in and rollers in that bucket of water. The safest way to dispose of it is down a toilet or utility sink. It's definitely never in a storm drain, and preferably not in their yard. But some homeowners don't feel comfortable with you coming in their house to dump paint. And you may end up having to do it in the yard, but that is not the most environmentally safe way. It is down the sink or a utility sink or a toilet, because then it'll go from there to a treatment plant. Mm-hmm. That's why we say fill up the bucket half full, because that way when you're taking it to go dump it, you're not sloshing water everywhere. The 5-in-1 tool, as I showed you, it had that round end. So if you have you have a brush, and the 5-in-1 tool can scrape over the brush like that and help remove some of the old paint. The wire brushes that are used to scrape sheet or single can also be used to brush through your paint brushes and help remove paint that way. If for some reason your crew does not have enough time to clean all the supplies, so the ideal thing is that you've cleaned all the supplies before you return them to us. If for whatever reason you don't have enough time to return them, there's some things you can do to make sure that we can later clean them and reuse them. So one thing is, if you can put brushes and rollers in a plastic bag and tie the bag. If they stay wet with paint, we'll still be able to clean them afterward. If you put them in a bucket of water, they'll generally rust. If you leave them to dry out, then they're dry and we're just going to have to toss them. So if you're not able to clean them, if you can put them in a plastic bag, they'll stay wet with the paint and we'll be able to clean them out later. With things like paint cups and paint trays, again, if you're not able to clean them, if you ask the homeowner if they can just leave them in the sun, when they dry out, the paint usually just peels right out of them. But if you stack them together while they're still wet with paint, they're going to stick together and we're never going to get them unstuck. We do provide you guys with tray liners for your paint roller trays, and those can actually just be tossed in the trash when you're done. Your plastic sheeting can be reused, but when you're done with the project, you should actually just dispose of it. Again, you want to roll it up like a sleeping bag. So you like fold it into itself and then roll it up and then seal it with duct tape. And that way, if there was any lead dust or anything on that, that's going to get disposed of. It's not going to be reused. So any questions about that? But it's just really important that we do clean up well. The other thing is that if there's things that were removed, for instance, when we talked about removing numbers and things like that, we put them back up on the house when we're done. And John, anything to add?
I always bring saran wrap, handy wrap with me, because that keeps the air out. So I'll wrap the roller and the brushes in plastic wrap when we take a lunch break or anything else, because it's amazing how fast that paint will dry if you just leave it sitting on a can.
Yep. Great.
Oh, and the other thing is, if you actually have access to it, you put it in handy wrap and stick it in a refrigerator or a freezer. That works even better.
That's not required, though.
Yeah, but it sure makes cleanup better.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Any other questions? We got about a minute left if folks have other questions.
And again, Brian's information is there. Brian is the main person to contact with questions about painting. And he's very knowledgeable. So more so than me. I've learned a lot in my years in Tacoma, but he's still the expert.
All right, and it's just as a general reminder for folks who are watching this as a pre-recorded training, just let me know when you finished this so I can account for you having been trained in prepping and painting. All right, well, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it, and don't hesitate to reach out to any of us if you do have questions. This is a volunteer-run program, so we are really appreciative of all of you taking the time out to go through the trainings and contribute your time, and it means a lot to us.